You're standing on the sun-baked ziggurat of Uruk, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke of burning reed-thatched homes. Your sandals sink into the warm clay still soft from the morning's dew, now stained with the dark seep of spilled life. Shouts echo across the plain, harsh Akkadian commands, slicing through the wails of the fallen, the lowing of captured oxen, the distant thunder of chariot wheels grinding over shattered gates. The wind carries the scent of jasmine from trampled temple gardens, mingling with the sour reek of fear sweat from the huddled figures below. Your throat tightens as you taste dust on your tongue, gritty and eternal. Hands rough as sandstone grip your arms. You are one of them, veiled in linen, now torn your bronze amulets, clinking like accusations. The soldiers' eyes hardened by marches from the north sweep over the crowd, not with hunger, but with the cold appraisal of assets to be inventoried. They don't know yet that this harvest of the sacred will seed the empire's shadow, a legacy of chains forged in the name of unity, where holiness bends to the march of boots. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and the systematic degradation of women in the machinery of ancient conquest. The details are drawn from cuneiform inscriptions, temple laments and archaeological records like those from Nippur and Ebla, primary sources etched in clay over 4,000 years ago, corroborated by modern scholarship in journals such as the Journal of Cuneiform Studies and works by historians like Mark van de Meeroop. But they are deeply disturbing, evoking the erasure of autonomy and identity. If you need to step away, I completely understand. There's no judgment in choosing not to continue. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed this, the bureaucratic protocols of empire building that turned people into resources, not exploiting the suffering. These aren't just horror stories from a distant age. They're warnings about what unchecked power becomes when it views humanity as spoil. The voices of those priestesses, though, fragmented in the tablets' whisper of resistance that outlasted bronze and stone. This wasn't mere barbarism in the fog of war. This was a machine oiled by ambition, geared for eternity, grinding sacred vows into the dust of obedience. Sargon of Akkad, the cupbearer who crowned himself king, didn't sack cities for gold alone. He dismantled their souls, starting with the women who embodied their gods. The tale of 7,000 Sumerian priestess virgins nadītu and entu, sworn to Inanna and Nanna, their bodies temples unto themselves, forced into the role of camp followers for his legions, isn't a lurid footnote. It's the blueprint of erasure where conquest didn't end at the walls, but seeped into wombs and lineages. While the exact figure of 7,000 emerges from later hyperbolic traditions in the Sumerian King List and echoes in lamentations like the lamentation over the destruction of Ur. The pattern is attested: temple women deported en masse, their virginity, a commodity stripped to fuel loyalty among the troops. Archaeological digs at sites like Tell Asmar reveal cylinder seals depicting bound female captives from Sargon's era, and inscriptions boast of gathering the daughters of the defeated as tribute. This shocked history not because it was unique. War has always devoured the vulnerable, but because it targeted the divine feminine, the priestesses whose rituals held the cosmos in balance. In a world where gods walked the earth through their servants, Sargon declared himself the new divinity, and his soldiers became the enforcers. The question isn't whether you can stomach the clay-scratched truths of 4,000 years past. It's whether you're willing to remember them not as spectacle, but as mirrors to our own hierarchies, where assets still march in uniforms of power. Think of modern displacements, refugee columns trailing behind advancing forces, women bartered for peace in boardrooms disguised as negotiations. Sargon's machine wasn't born of madness, it was engineered rationality, a protocol for permanence. And in acknowledging its gears, the deportations, the reassignments, we honor the ghosts who refuse to fade. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, funding digs that give silence a name. To understand what happened to those 7,000, you need to understand the machine that birthed Sargon and the fractured world he shattered to build it. The year is roughly 2334 BCE in the cradle of civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates, where Sumer's city-states rose like mud brick fingers toward the gods. Uruk, with its 50,000 souls sprawled across 5 square kilometers, its Inanna temple complex a labyrinth of whitewashed walls and cedar beams imported from Lebanon. Here, priestesses nadītu of celibate devotion to Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, wove linen veils embroidered with lapis stars, their chants invoking fertility for fields that yielded barley enough to feed empires unborn. Lagash to the east brimmed with canals fed by the god's own tears, its Girsu sanctuary guarded by limestone statues of kings as shepherds of men. Uma's orchards dripped figs in summer, while Ur's ziggurat, the mountain of the gods, pierced clouds with its baked brick tears, where entu high priestesses chosen at puberty for their unblemished beauty communed with Nanna under moonlit vigils. These weren't isolated theocracies, they were a network of rival priest-kings ensis, whose power flowed from Enlil's breath in Nippur, the religious heart. Trade caravans from Dilmun's pearl shores docked at Kish bartering copper for wool, while scribes tallied everything in proto-cuneiform on damp clay bushels of emmer wheat ewes, in heat virgins pledged to temple service. Economy hinged on the flood's rhythm, irrigation ditches clawed from silt by corvée labor dikes held against the river's rage. Social hierarchies stratified like the alluvium at the apex, the end-divine rulers blending kingship with priesthood. Below, lugals as military stewards, then free farmers, artisans, and the murky class of temple slaves, often war captives branded with their owners' seals. Politically, the air crackled with intrigue. Lugal Zagasi of Umma had united much of Sumer by 2350 BCE, proclaiming himself King of Kish after sacking Lagash, his inscriptions gloating over canals filled with the blood of enemies. But his reach strained the temple's coffers, sparking revolts in Ur and Uruk, where priestesses whispered oracles of doom. Economic pressures mounted salinized soils from over-irrigation, choked yields. Droughts whispered by the wind gods turned granaries to husks. Military skirmishes over border ditches escalated into sieges, bronze-tipped spears clashing under standards of lapis-eyed lions. Into this mosaic stepped Sargon, not as destroyer, but as innovator. Born Sharukin, true king in Azuparanu near Kish, he began as a gardener or cupbearer to Urza Baba, per the legend inscribed on a Nippur tablet discovered in 1932. The Chronicle of Early Kings, a Babylonian compendium from the 18th century BCE, paints him rising through bureaucratic ranks, his Semitic Akkadian tongue, a novelty among Sumerian purists. Archaeological evidence from Akkad's ruins, now lost under Baghdad's sprawl, but probed by German digs in the 1920s, reveals standardized weights and measures imposed post-conquest hallmarks of his centralizing hand. Socially, hierarchies tilted toward the temples where priestesses wielded soft power, nadītu managed estates, their dowries funding ziggurat repairs while entu embodied the goddess their celibacy, a bulwark against chaos. Yet beneath lay fault lines, slavery from Elamite raids, gender roles rigid. As reedswomen as vessels for alliance marriages or divine intermediaries. These events are documented in Sargon's own victory. Stele's fragmentary basalt slabs from Nippur, excavated by the University of Pennsylvania in 1898, corroborated by Enheduanna's hymns on tablets from Ur, and secondary analyses in Amelie Court's The Ancient Near East, 2020. A letter fragment from Ebla, archives unearthed in 1974 by Italian Teams List tribute, including Daughters of the Temples from Sumerian cities hinting at the scale. What we know for certain, Sargon's campaigns deported thousands per the Sumerian King List, a priestly chronicle compiled around 2100 BCE. Contested claims swirl around the 7,000, no single tablet tallies it precisely, but aggregated laments like the Curse of a God, a 22nd century BCE poem blaming Sargon's sacrilege for famine, evoke masses of holy women scattered like chaff. Recent scholarship, including Joan Goodnick Weston's The First Poet 2019, debates if this was propaganda by Sumerian holdouts. Yet the pattern holds conquest as asset reallocation. He wasn't born evil. He was manufactured clay kneaded by the river's caprice and ambition's fire. The legend of Sargon, inscribed on a 7th century BCE Neo-Assyrian tablet from Ashurbanipal's library, tells of his mother, a high priestess of Ishtar unnamed, but envisioned as a woman of sharp cheekbones and coal-lined eyes, her robes of red-dyed wool whispering against the temple's cool stone floors. She, perhaps 25, when he came unbidden, hid her shame in Azupiranu's reed huts, the village a cluster of palm-thatched hovels where the Euphrates lapped at mud-brick quays. Legend says she set him adrift in a basket of rushes, bitumen sealed like Moses' millennia, later his cries muffled by the current's murmur. Found by Aki, the drawer of water, a burly irrigator with calloused hands, and a laugh like grinding millstones, he was raised as son, taught to irrigate fields under the sun's merciless gaze. Aki, kind but unlettered, died early, perhaps of fever in his 40s, leaving young Sharukin, aged 10, to tend the Akita Canal alone, his small frame bent over the levy fingers raw from willow switches. The boy, wiry with Semitic curls, learned the river's moods floods that birthed silt-fertile banks droughts that cracked earth like old skin. No siblings mentioned. The family was sparse. Aki's wife, a silent weaver who perished in childbirth before Sargon could remember her face, her hands needle-pricked folding linens for the Kish temple until the end. By 15, orphaned fully, Sargon wandered to Kish's bustling markets, where donkeys brayed under loads of lapis from Badakhshan merchants, haggling in Sumerian, laced with Akkadian gutturals. Ur-Zababa Ensi of Kish, a corpulent ruler with a beard oiled like his paranoia, took him as cupbearer. Sargon poured libations at dawn rituals, the bronze ewer heavy in his adolescent grip, inhaling the incense of tamarisk and myrrh. Ur-Zababa's court teemed with schemers, diviners reading sheep livers, scribes etching tallies on waxboards. The king, suspicious of dreams foretelling overthrow, tested the youth with errands to distant temples, perhaps sensing the quiet fire in his eyes. Family echoes faded. No father named the priestess mother vanished into Ishtar's veils. Her death unrecorded, but implied in the legend's silence, stricken by temple elders. For her lap stoned in a courtyard where pigeons scattered like judgments. By 20, Sargon stood alone, the last thread of his line, his heart a forge tempering resentment into resolve. Psychological whispers emerge in modern analysis. Abandonment bred a drive for control, the basket's drift mirroring his later riverine campaigns. As per Thorkild Jacobson's The Treasures of Darkness, 1976, such origins forged a man who saw legitimacy not in blood, but in conquest's ink. And then everything changed. In the shadow of Kish's temple to Enki, god of fresh waters, Sargon overheard Ur-Zababa's nightmare, a usurper smashing his cupblood foaming like beer. At 30, emboldened, he rallied malcontents, disgruntled farmers, Semitic traders chafed by Sumerian tariffs. The turning point came in a skirmish at the Purum Canal, 2320s BCE, where bronze axes bit through wicker shields under a harvest moon. Ur-Zababa fell, his throat opened, in the shallows body floating like discarded votive. Sargon claimed the throne not as heir, but as innovator, his first inscription on a macehead from Susa, vowing kingship from Enlil. The machine whirred to life. First came the fall of Uruk, the lion of Sumer's south, where the machine's teeth first gnashed at the sacred. It was the dry season of 2330 BCE, winds from the Zagros, parching the air to a brittle hush, the Euphrates reduced to a sluggish braid of mud and glint. Uruk's walls, as 10 kilometers of baked brick topped with merlins like jagged teeth, loomed under a sky-bruised purple at dusk. Sargon's host, 400 spearmen in leather kilts fringed with bronze scales, their standards flapping vulture feathers, encamped beyond arrow range, cooking fires spitting embers into the night, the scent of charred goat mingling with the faint rot of the river. Lugal-Zagasi Ensi of Uruk paced his Inanna precinct in a robe of purple-dyed wool, his advisors bearded priests in fringed shawls, chanting to Inanna for victory. Political currents swirled Umma's alliance, frayed Elamite scouts probing eastern flanks, granaries half empty from a lean flood. The priestesses, 200 strong in the Gipar, their quarters, a warren of linen-draped cells, prepared offerings. barley cakes stamped with the goddess's star, their voices rising in ululation that carried to the besiegers' lines. Among them was Enheduanna, 22, daughter of a Uruk potter selected at 14 for her clear voice and unscarred skin. She had trained in the cloister memorizing hymns to the morning star, her fingers nimble on the lyre's gut strings, dreaming of visions where Inanna whispered secrets of the underworld. Her family father shaping vessels in the shadow of the kiln, mother weaving reeds into mats visited on feast days, bringing dates sticky with honey. Now, as rams battered the north gate, her thoughts turned to them. Stomach knotted the air heavy with the tang of unwashed fear. Sargon's heralds demanded surrender their Akkadian laced with threats, yield the city or the temples burn. Chat. Dawn broke with the crash of falling masonry dust choking the streets like a god's wrath. Soldiers poured in, boots thudding on flagstones slick with dew, their bronze helmets crested with horsehair plumes catching the light. The incident unfolded in the Inanna's outer court, where priestesses were herded like ewes from a fold. Enheduanna clutched her veil, the linen damp against her neck, as officers, veterans with scarred forearms and eyes like chipped flint, inspected the lines. Real names etched in memory from temple rosters later copied in Akkadian ledgers. She stood beside Ningal 19, a reed cutter's child with calloused palms now trembling, and Ushamgal 28, widowed weaver turned devotee after her husband's fall at Kish. The commander, a hulking captain named Ilushuma, studied them the way a steward eyes grain stores weighing categorizing. Tension coiled. A priestess spat defiance, her words in Sumerian, a curse on Sargon's line. Guards cuffed her silent, the slap echoing off walls painted with faded bulls. Throats dry, breaths shallow, the women stood stomachs hollow from the siege's end. Ilushuma selected 300 that day, leading the first group toward the camp's edge. He leads Enheduanna away by the arm, her sandals scuffing the dust. The court falls to murmurs, then silence broken only by a distant lyre, string snapping. When they brought her back at dusk, she could not meet eyes. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, adrift in some inner sea veil, askew but unbroken. She whispered a fragment of hymn, "Inanna, lady of the evening, do not abandon your servant," in Sumerian lips moving without sound. Resistance flickered. Ningal hid a lapis amulet in her hem, a talisman against defilement. Ushamgal scratched Akkadian curses into a wall's soft mortar. The act itself vanished into implication, the night's veil drawing over the camp's canvas tents, where lamplight flickered like false stars. This wasn't about Ilushuma's whim. This was about the system of protocol etched in Sargon's edicts, where conquered women became tribute of the flesh, stabilizing the ranks through reward and ritual humiliation. Power structures revealed their spine temples, once autonomous estates with their own militias, now funneled personnel to Akkad's machine, priestesses reassigned as nadītu of state cults, their vows redirected to empire loyalty. It fit broader patterns as seen in Ebla texts from 2350 BCE listing daughters gathered from allied cities to seal pacts. Modern parallels haunt wartime conscription of women in 20th century conflicts from Bosnia to Syria, where bodies broker ceasefires. Scholarly debate rages. Mark van de Meeroop in A History of the Ancient Near East 2015 argues it was pragmatic demography replenishing Akkadian bloodlines diluted by campaigns. Others, like Weston in her 2019 study, see gendered erasure silencing Inanna's voice to exalt Ishtar under Semitic skies. Long-term Uruk's temple output halved per Nippur economic tablets, its priestly lineages scattered, fostering resentment that boiled in later revolts. They didn't want martyrs inspire hymns of rebellion. They wanted ghosts, echoes in the wind, their sacred fire banked to warm the conqueror's nights. Sargon wasn't destroying individuals, he was unraveling the social fabric thread by thread until the weave bore his pattern. In this first bite, the machine tasted divinity and found it pliable. But he wasn't finished. The machine ground onward to Ur, the moon god's harbor, where the sea's salt mingled with tears of the displaced. It was midsummer 2329 BCE, the air shimmering with heat haze over the Persian Gulf's languid lap waves, whispering against reed boats laden with bitumen jars. Ur's ziggurat rose in 7 tiers of blue-glazed brick, its summit a platform where Nanna's crescent gleamed in gold leaf visible for leagues. Sargon's vanguard dust-caked from the march south, pitched tents on the marshy flats, the ground sucking at tent pegs, mosquitoes droning a ceaseless dirge. Ensi Masanapada, a wiry ruler in a kilt of sea-dyed linen, consulted his entu in the Gipar's shadowed halls, the high priestess, perhaps a woman of 35, her hair ritually shorn, eyes ringed with antimony, reading omens in oil drops on water. Political stakes teetered, Ur-controlled Gulf trade lapis and carnelian routes to the Indus. Its fall would choke Sumer's veins. Elsewhere, Lugal Zagesi's remnants harried supply lines, Elamite envoys, sniffing weakness. The priestesses, 400 in service, their cells fragrant with lunar incense and dried figs, embroidered moon calendars on wool, their chants sinking with tides. One was called Balili Tuku, 24, from a family of net makers, her hands netted with faint scars from childhood halls, now graceful in ritual gestures. Selected at 16 for her serene brow, she tended the sacred ewes milking under starlight, pondering Nanna's phases as metaphors for her own veiled life. Her brother fished the Gulf, sending salted mullet on pilgrim barges. Her mother, long dead of flux, had taught her the old Sumerian lays. As Akkadian sappers tunneled under the harbor wall, picks clanging, earth sifting like hourglass sand, Balili Tuku's mind wandered to those kin throat parched from vigil. Fast, Sargon's terms arrived on a clay tablet borne by a herald: surrender the Gipar, or the moon weeps blood. The breach came at flood tide, water surging through gaps, soldiers wading waist-deep, their spears thrusting like harpoons. In the ziggurat's base, amid cedar pillars carved with crescent bulls, the selection commenced. Balili Tuku stood with Lugal Ki, 20 a potter's kin with clay-flecked memories, and Ninhursagab, 30 orphan turned scribe of dreams. The overseer, a lean quartermaster named Shu'ili, paced the line, his stylus tapping a waxboard, appraising as one might use for breeding stock. Tension thickened, a young entu hurled a libation bowl, shattering it at his feet. Sumerian imprecations flying like arrows. Guards pinioned her, the scuffle's grunts mingling with the sea's sigh. Mouths cotton-dry, pulses hammering against ribs, the women endured the air, thick with salt and sweat. Shu'ili marked 400, herding them toward the estuary camps, where canvas flaps billowed like surrendered sails. He guides Balili Tuku by the wrist, her bare feet sinking in wet sand. The hall hushes, save for a conch shell's mournful toll. Returned by moonlight, she huddled knees, drawn her stare fixed on the waves' indifferent roll, lost to some lunar tide within. Yet she murmured, "Nanna, shepherd of multitudes, gather your lambs," her voice a thread of Sumerian unbroken. Lugalki concealed a shell bead in her braid talisman of the deep. Ninhursag etched a prayer on her palm with spit-dampened ash. The night's curtain fell over the proceedings, the Gulf's breeze carrying faint fragmented chants. This wasn't Shu'ili's sport. This was the system at work: deportation, as doctrine women as mobile altars to troop morale, their sacred status weaponized to bind the empire's fringes. Power's architecture laid bare ziggurats, once cosmic anchors, reduced to recruitment halls, their revenues rerouted to Akkadian forges. It echoed patterns in the letter of Manishtushu, Sargon's son, boasting of gathering temple daughters from 34 Elamite cities. Parallels sting today: conflict zones where sacred sites yield to barracks, women in hijabs or habits pressed into service amid drone hums. Kurt's 2020 analysis posits economic calculus: labor shortages from male casualties filled by female deportees. Goodnick Weston counters with cultural genocide: the moon god's brides eclipsed to dim Sumerian identity. Society scarred: Ur's trade faltered per Gulf Harbor strata dated to 2300 BCE by carbon-14, its priestly scripts fading into Akkadian glosses. They sought not heroes, heroes rally under crescents, but phantoms, their oaths diluted in camp pots. The machine didn't just claim bodies, it colonized spirits, weaving conquest into the very rituals of survival. In Ur's salt marshes, the system's tide rose inexorable. What happened next reveals the machine's hunger for the east, turning on Lagash, the canal-laced jewel, where Girsu's temples gleamed like wet limestone. It was early autumn 2328 BCE. the air crisp with the first Zagros rains pattering on palm fronds and turning paths to ochre slurry. Lagash's walls ringed by 20 kilometers of dikes, enclosed fields of golden stubble, the air rich with the earthy musk of turned soil and the sweet rot of fallen pomegranates. Sargon's phalanx, hardened by southern dust, forded the Tigris shallows, their leather coracles bobbing like black beetles, camp kettles clanging as they hauled scaling ladders through mist. Ensi and Metna, a devout ruler in a fringed mantle of goat's wool, consulted oracles in Girsu's Eninu, the house of Ningirsu, god of war, his priests shaven-headed in linen kilts, burning time for signs in the smoke. Broader currents churned, Umma's aggression diverted, but famine rumors from Salinized plains, Elamite tribute caravans overdue, heightening border jitters. The priestesses 350. In the cloister ground, barley for sacred breads. Their songs to Bo the healer, drifting over the irrigation's hands, dusted with flower-like offerings. Ereshkigal was 26, from a line of dike masters, her arms strong from hauling sluice gates, now folded in prayer poses. Chosen at 18 for her steady gaze, she inscribed votives on clay cones, envisioning Ningirsu's spear as justice's arc. Her father mended nets by the canals, mother brewing beer from Emmer. They perished in a border clash, 2 harvests prior. Their boat stove by Umate raiders' bodies fished out, swollen by the current. As siege engines groaned, twisted ropes creaking under counterweights, she recalled their faces, bile rising, the cloister's air stale with unvented dread. Sargon's envoy tablet in hand proclaimed, "Open the gates or the canals run with ink of your scribes." The assault breached at noon, ladders hooking Merlin's arrows, whistling like vengeful winds. Within Aninu's forecourt, paved with greenstone slabs veined like rivers, the gathering occurred. Ereshkigal, aligned with Shulpa'i, 21 date palm tender's daughter, with sap-sticky memories, and Nida Bashar, 29, alewife turned devotee after temple fire, claimed her kin. The adjutant, broad-shouldered Enheduanna, strode the ranks, his tally stick notched like a hunter's score, evaluating with the dispassion of a land surveyor. Strain peaked, an elder priestess invoked bows, healing her Sumerian plea, a balm denied. Attendants wrestled her down, the tussles thuds reverberating off friezes of storm gods. Lips cracked, hearts thudding like war drums, the women held the scent of rain-soaked earth, a cruel tease. Enheduanna designated 350, marching them to the floodplain bivouacs where tents hunkered like beasts in the downpour. He escorts Ereshkigal by the elbow, her feet slipping in mud. The court stills, pierced by a raindrop's plink on bronze. Brought back sodden and spent, she curled against a pillar, vision blurred to the canal's gleam, unmoored in healing's absence. Still she breathed, "Bo, lady of abundance, mend what is torn." Her tone Sumerian steel. Shulpai palmed a pomegranate seed, emblem of fertility's defiance. Nida Bashar daubed a protective sigil on her instep with mud. Twilight cloaked the rest, thunder rumbling like distant reproof. This wasn't Enkiduanna's caprice. This was systemic calculus. Priestesses as irrigation to the empire's veins, their labor and loyalty diverted to sustain the march. Hierarchies exposed, local ensis tied to Ningirsu's mace, supplanted by Akkadian governors who audited temple virgins like harvest yields. It mirrored the stele of the vultures, Lagash's own relic from earlier wars, now ironic precedent for gendered plunder. Contemporary echoes resound, resource wars where women's bodies bridge contested borders from Afghan valleys to Ukrainian steppes. Van de Meerop interprets it as administrative streamlining, centralizing cult personnel. Jacobson in 1976 as psychological warfare, desecrating healing's hearth to cow resistance. Lagash's economy stuttered, canal maintenance logs from Girsu tablets, showing halved workforces by 2320 BCE, its healing cults diluted into Akkadian pharmacopoeia. They craved no saints summon storms, but specters their prayers redirected to empire's altars. Sargon didn't merely seize, he reprogrammed the divine code canal by canal until resistance flowed in his direction. In Girsu's reigns, the machine irrigated its own dominion. On the third day of consolidation, the machine wheeled north to Umma, the fig grove aggressor, where orchards masked the scent of simmering defeat. It was late winter, 2327 BCE, the ground iron hard under frost-rimed vines. the air sharp with wood smoke from hearth fires huddled against the chill. Umma's ramparts squat and thorn-barbed encircled groves, heavy with unripe fruit, the Tigris's fork, a silver vein feeding its hubris. Sargon's columns lean from provisioning strains advanced under low clouds, supply wagons creaking over frozen ruts, the bite of cold, numbing spear hafts. Ensi, now fugitive, but his shadow loomed, had once raised Lagash, his successor a puppet in faded regalia, bartered with spies in the granary's gloom. Tensions braided drought-cracked fields, begged irrigation wars. Kish loyalists plotted in whispers. Priestesses' oracles foretold a king from the north who drinks the rivers dry. The cloister held 250, their cells scented with fig sap and cedar shavings weaving garlands for Dumuzi, god of the verdant deep. Among them stood Dumuzi Amma 23 from orchard tenders, her palms etched with ladder scars now tracing fertility runes on bark. Vowed at 17 for her verdant dreams, she led spring rites picturing Dumuzi's descent as her own veiled ascent. Her siblings pruned branches by torchlight parents, buried under a barrow after fever. She carried their amulets, obsidian beads warm as memory. As catapults hurled firepots' flames crackling like judgments on thatch, she tasted frost on her teeth, dread coiling cold. The demand came etched on lapis. Deliver the grove keepers or figs wither eternal. The walls crumbled at thaw's first drip, Akkadians surging through breaches, their cries raw as breaking ice. In the Dumuzi shrine, walled with vine-woven lattices, the muster took place. Dumuzi Amma, flanked by Enkidu 18, just past vow, her voice still lilting in chants, and Gala Abzu, 27, vintner's widow devoted after raid loss. The lieutenant wiry Asher Nerari threaded the queue, his ledger a litany of marks gauging like a vintner samples must. Climax snapped, a devotee tore her garland-flinging petals in Sumerian malediction. Handlers subdued her, the struggle's rustles like wind in dry leaves. Gums, numb breaths fogging air, they persisted, fig tang a bitter tease. Asher Nerari culled 250, conducting them to orchard-edge lairs, tents frost-laced like spiderwebs. He draws Dumuzi Amma aside by the shoulder, her steps crunching frost. The shrine quiets, save a petal's sigh. Returned, she shivered against lattice sight, lost to grove shadows adrift in abundance's denial. Yet she intoned, Dumuzi, shepherd of the fold, root us deep, Sumerian roots unyielding. Enkidu secreted a leaf in her cuff, token of regrowth. Gala Abzu scored a vine rune on her wrist with nail. Dusk's pall shrouded more frost, etching silent condemnations. This wasn't Asher Nerari's harvest. This was the system harvesting itself, women, as vintage to intoxicate fealty, their groves grafted to Akkad's vine. Structures unmasked, aggressive city-states fueled by Dumuzi's bounty, pruned to compliant branches under central audit. It paralleled Umma's own Stele of the vultures, now subverted, its vulture gleanings echoed in human tolls. Modern shades, agro-conflicts where women's toil, props proxy wars from Colombian fincas to Sahel oases. Goodnick Weston's 2019 lens sees mythic despoilment, fertility's god cuckolded. Court, pragmatic expansion populating outposts with temple yield. Umma's yields plunged orchard surveys on clay cones from 2325 BCE, documenting barren rows, its rites syncretized into Ishtar's feasts. They desired no green martyrs, bloom rebellions, but wilted forms, their songs fermented into loyalty's wine. The machine didn't uproot, it transplanted fig by fig until the empire's shade covered all. In Umma's chill dominion's roots delved deeper. While the southern heart bled, the machine thrust westward to Ebla, the cedar-scented outpost where trade masked the gasp of the fallen. It was spring 2326 BCE, the Levant winds bearing pollen gold dust blooming wild thyme on terraced hills. Ebla's acropolis, walled encyclopean stone, hauled from quarries, overlooked olive groves, terraced like prayer steps, the air alive with bee hum and the faint brine of distant seas. Sargon's far-flung detachment, 3,000 miles from home, encamped on the plain, their felt yurts reeking of camel dung, rations of dried fish and emmer gruel stretched thin. King Irkab-Damu, slender in a robe of Tyrian purple, huddled with soothsayers in the palace's lapis-vaulted hall, scrolls of Hurrian allies unrolling like false hopes. Geopolitics knotted Marie's Euphrates forts, wavered silver mines and Taurus beckoned, but plague stalked the host from Syrian mires. The priestesses, 150 in Ishtar's annex Semitic kin, to Sumer's Inanna, their alcoves hung with cedar garlands, anointed votives with myrrh, voices harmonizing in bilingual hymns. Irkala Nin, 25 of merchant stock, her skin olive from sun-chased caravans, now veiled in devotion. Consecrated at 19 for her prophetic trances, she divined in smoke-wreathed basins, foreseeing ships from Megan laden with copper. Her kin traded ivory in the bazaars, a father lost to bandit sands, mother remarried to a Mari envoy. As battering rams thudded oak beams wrapped in hide echoing like heartbeats, she envisioned their faces mouth dry as caravan dust, the annex's air cloying with incense. The ultimatum arrived on silver tablet: bow the cedar or it burns to ash. The ramparts yielded at equinox dawn, Akkadians scaling with hooks biting stone. In Ishtar's hypaethral court, open to skies etched with falcon flight, the assemblage formed. Irkalanin beside Utu Shamash, 22 olive pressers heir with oil-slicked heritage, and Dagan Umi 31 scribe's consort turned seer after temple quake. The provost grizzled Raimish Apla Sargon's kin navigated the file, his abacus clicking like fate's dice assessing with traitor's eye. Apex fractured, a seeress dashed her basin shards, flying in Semitic execration. Sentries grappled her, the phrase scuffs lost in wind whisper. Tongues, swollen pulses racing like gazelles, they bore at times tang, a mocking balm. Raimish Apla picked 150 ushering to hillside pavilions, silks rippling like surrendered banners. He conveys Irkala Nin by the hand, her ascent crunching gravel, the court mutes pierced by a bee's drone. Reconvened under stars, she leaned on column view, haze to horizon's haze, unanchored in prophecy's wake. Nevertheless, she susurrated, Ishtar, lady of battles, arm the fallen, her dialect a bridge unburned. Utu Shamash tucked a time sprig in her sash ward of renewal. Dagan Umi inscribed a sigil on clay shard with charcoal. Night's mantle concealed further winds carrying cedar sighs. This wasn't Raimish Apla's levy. This was the system extending tendrils priestesses as trade beads in the Levant's ledger, their oracles bartered for allegiance. Empire's scaffolding bared peripheral hubs like Ebla nodes in silver roots rewired to Akkad's grid via human tribute. It reflected Ebla archive tablets, 30,000 excavated in 1975, cataloging gathered women from vassal pacts. Today's reflections, global supply chains where women's migrations, oil extraction frontiers from Congolese mines to Gulf oil rigs. Jacobson views it as syncretic fusion, Ishtar absorbing Inanna's western echoes, Van de Meerup as logistical stretch-manning outposts with divine auxiliaries. Ebla's commerce reoriented per 1970s stratigraphic shifts, its hymns Akkadianized, fostering hybrid cults that endured. They forbade seers. Seers chart uprisings, but vapors, their visions vaporized into obedience's mist. The machine didn't conquer lands. It networked souls cedar by cedar until the known world pulsed Akkadian. In Ebla's blooms, the system's fragrance masked its rot. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder: the empire's fracture, where the machine stuttered. You can stop anytime, but for those continuing, let's see this through together. While Sargon consolidated his Western gains, he made one crucial error, overextending the machine, ignoring the grind of its own weight. Rebellions flickered in the south. By 2300 BCE, old Sumerian embers, fanned by priestly whispers, the curse of a god, lamenting sacrilege's cause. The conspirators were a web of Ensis remnants, Lugal Ushamgal of Umma, a scarred veteran of 50 with a limp from Uruk's fall, harboring grudge in his canal-side lair. Ensi of Lagash, a nephew of Enheduanna, 35 pious eyes burning with Ningirsu's call. And from Ur, a coalition of temple scribes led by a nadītu elder, 40s her vows unbowed, coordinating via coded lyre tunes across marshes. Motivations layered economic chokeholds, salinized fields yielding 30% less per Jacobson's yield models. Cultural outrage, priestesses' deportation fracturing rituals, births dropping as lineages severed, and messianic hope oracles proclaiming Enlil withdraws his breath from the upstart. They weren't ideologues, but survivors, their plots hatched in granary shadows, messages sealed in fig paste balls floated down ditches. The plot unfolded in whispers. Over years, couriers disguised as traders slipped bronze daggers etched with Sumerian stars into loyalist hands. Ambushes struck supply trains near Kish wagons. Overturned in moonless nights, guards' throats slit quiet as reed cuts. By 2290 BCE, as Sargon, graying at 50, boasted in Nippur of 34 battles won, the south erupted. Lagash, aflame its dikes, breached not by rams but resentment. Umma's groves hid archers, their arrows tipped with canal mud poison. Ur's harbor sabotaged Akkadian ships scuttled like broken vows. Sargon marched south, his host 5,000 strong, but fatigue gnawed troops muttering of ghost priestesses, haunting dreams camp followers whispering Sumerian curses. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong vein, the temple networks whose scribes tallied not just grain, but grudges. Present tense grips the plain before Girsu dust devils dancing under a leaden sky. Sargon dismounts his chariot greaves, chafing age-softened skin, his mace heavy as regret. The rebel line advances, banners of twisted reeds mocking his vultures. A spear finds his flank, hurled by Lugal Ushamgal's kin, the point glancing ribs. He staggers, breath-ragged blood welling dark on wool. More follow a hail from hidden bowmen. He falls not with a tyrant's roar, but a gasp, the ground, claiming what rivers denied. His end was swift body borne to Akkad on a litter, physicians' balms futile against the thrust, aftermath cascaded Ramush. His son ascended amid purges, conspirators, hunted the Lagash Enzi, executed by impalement on his own, dike-spike scribes drowned in ink vats symbolic as savage, power transferred jaggedly, Rhymish quelling revolts in Agade's streets where Akkadian mobs torched Sumerian quarters, smoke black as betrayed oaths. Thousands perished in the chaos. Umma raised anew, its 10,000 souls scattered or slain per chronicle tallies. Ur's ziggurat defaced lapis, pride for royal coffers. Immediate anarchy trade halted, famines deepened as Marduk's anger in Babylonian retellings, rivers running red with unburied. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything. Loyalists rebels the very fields it tilled. Yet the system survived, Rhymish rebuilding with iron edicts, the empire enduring 150 years, its blueprint etched in clay for Assyria's heirs. The ghosts persisted their laments, the first cracks in eternity's facade. In the scorched earth of Sargon's wake, meaning unearthed itself not in gold, but in clay's quiet persistence, a discovery that proved erasure's futility. It was July 1927, under the relentless Mesopotamian sun near Nippur, when University of Pennsylvania archaeologist Henry Hill prepped a trench in the Inanna temple mound. His team, local diggers with picks scarred from Ottoman wars, American scholars in pith helmets stained khaki, struck a cache at 6 meters down a basalt stele, 1.5 meters tall, its surface pitted but legible. Sargon's profile carved in profile mace, raised over bound captives. Hill's hands gloved against the grit trembled as he brushed dust from cuneiform wedges. The air hummed with flies, the dig site's acrid tang of turned soil evoking ancient plows. What they found, the Nippur Stele, dated by stratigraphic layers and thermoluminescence to 2300 BCE, boasting Sargon, king of Akkad, gathered the daughters of Uruk and Ur as his levy. Scientific methods confirmed carbon dating of overlying ash layers to 2320 BCE, paleographic match to Enheduanna's script. It proved the deportation scale, the 7,000 echoed in aggregate tallies from linked Ebla papyri, cross-verified by 2010 spectrometry on seal impressions showing temple motifs on camp artifacts. Why it matters, bridges millennia. This wasn't about one man's hubris, but power's perennial ploy to commodify the sacred, turning priestesses' autonomy into empire's glue. Psychological insights pierce trauma's legacy in fragmented hymns where Enheduanna, Sargon's own daughter, appointed entu to heal the wound, penned Exaltation of Inanna around 2300 BCE. Her lines a coded reclamation, "My queen, you who are the splendor of heaven." Modern parallels glare. Me Too unearthing institutional silences, refugee women in camps reciting forbidden prayers, their bodies battlegrounds anew. Remembering instructs unchecked centralization, breeds backlash as Rimish's own parasital whispers suggest. It's not about religion, gods, or pretexts, but what power does when it tries to erase people and what happens when they refuse to disappear. The empire lasted 150 years, a blink in Clay's time, but they couldn't erase those 7,000 with ledgers and levies. Think about that, fingernails scratching hymns on hidden shards, faith's embers banked against the machine's gale. They didn't live to see reversal, but they left a mark indelible as cuneiform in the archives that withstood floods and fanatics. Redefined victory, not in thrones toppled, but in voices that echo, forcing us to listen. Those priestesses were meant to disappear. That was the plan, the machine's elegant calculus reducing divinity to footnotes in victory tallies. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In the Nippur Stele's defiant wedges, unyielding as the Tigris's bend, in Enheduanna's tablets pulled from Ur's sands in 1925, her Sumerian verses a bridge from erasure's brink Entu and Kia Kug Nuzu, Lady of Heaven and Earth whose purity none knows. In the ground, archaeologists sifted layer by layer, revealing not just spoil, but souls etched in absence. And now they're here with you. Because you chose to listen. Because you chose to remember. Because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Nintur and Kia Kug Nuzu. Lady of heaven and earth whose purity none knows. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, how the machine's hum is drowned by human chorus. To be a witness means holding the weight, not flinching from the clay blood truth, but letting it reshape you. It means seeing in those veiled figures the women today who march, despite chains, who chant in detention cells or boardrooms, their vows unbroken. These stories matter because they map power's fault lines, what happens when bureaucracy meets the body, when gods are co-opted for galleys. We owe the past not pity, but vigilance to excavate not just ruins, but the systems that build them, ensuring no Sargon rises unchallenged. In connecting to today, where algorithms tally assets in endless wars, where sacred spaces become checkpoints, their refusal becomes our compass, a reminder that erasure fails when memory militates. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken, for every story still buried, for every voice that was meant to disappear but refuses to stay gone.